And last on my board is the Strymon Iridium. So when I started this odyssey a little more than 3 years ago, I've gone through dozens and dozens of pieces of gear, from pedals to amps, guitars, audio interfaces. They call them direct injection boxes to help put into the computer. So it's been a real journey learning what everything sounds like, what everything does, the best order for pedals, so on and so forth. And at one point, I owned, I'm going to say, I think I owned 4 amplifiers at one point in time. A Fender Blues Junior, a Vox AC15, a Fender Bassbreaker 007, and a Hartkey. It was like a 15-watt bass pedal. That's a lot of amplifiers. And when I would try to record with a live microphone, the SM57, when I would play this in a room, even at, like, for example, my Blues Junior at level 3, and I think they went up to 10 or 11, something like that. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was 10. But at level 3, my wife could hear me playing the amp in a room that had, with a closed door, windows shut, everything, about a block away from our house. So that'll give you an idea of how loud a tube amp can get. And it just got to a point when I learned about this pedal, when I saw the demos online, I was like, I gotta trade in my tube amplifiers and get something that's has a smaller footprint, where I can record at any hour of the day, and I don't have to have a specially treated room or record inside of a closet because it was so loud. So there's a lot of conversation about tube amps versus modeling amps. I do honestly think in a live situation, a tube amp is going to sound better. And if you have a great studio, like a professional studio with microphones set up and someone who knows what they're doing in the recording process, you could probably get at least a slightly better sound than you would with an amp modeler. That's a huge debate, conversation, but I switched to this for practical reasons. And that reasoning is very simple. These 3 settings represent round equals Fender, chime equals Vox, and punch equals Marshall. And in general, in terms of broad categories of amps, those are going to get you the 3 most broad category of amp. We've got 1 American style, and we've got 2 British style. So the Marshall is kind of like the hard rock amp that Hendrix used, Guns N' Roses used, AC/DC used, and it gets a lot of gain. And actually, I found in the end that I really like the clean setting on a Marshall as well. The Vox is definitely, at least from my reference point, a great amp for a praise and worship setting. If I was going to go back onto a worship team and had a live amp, I'd probably pick the Vox AC15. But this is somewhere in between Fender and Marshall. This can get a nice broken up, I'm going to say it's less bite maybe than the Marshall, but it gets good breakup, and it also has a good clean setting. This is an amp that the Beatles used back in the 60s. And the round amp is based on actually the chime is based on a Vox AC30. I might have said that wrong earlier. The round is based on a Fender Deluxe Reverb, which various sources love to tout as the most recorded amp in the world. I don't know if that's true or not. I've read it in multiple different places, so it wouldn't surprise me. I really personally like the sound of a Deluxe Reverb. And what's great about the Strymon Iridium is it gives you a middle knob in terms of the EQ, which the original Deluxe Reverb lacked. There was a mid scoop in it that can work for some applications, but if you're using a distortion pedal with the mids already scooped out, putting it into an amp that has the mids scooped, you end up losing too much audio information. So having this middle knob was really helpful. And then on top of that, and this is really what is going, I mean, the amp modeler is going to have obviously an enormous impact on the sound, but the type of cab IR, impulse response, that you use is going to also have a huge determining factor in your sound. And basically what cab IR manufacturers do is they record live amp models, the live cabinet, meaning the live speaker, in a live room in a bunch of different positions. So you get a audio file of a cabinet that has been mic'd with a specific microphone, and it's been recorded into the computer, and you can use it again in an amp modeler. So in effect, what this is doing is it's taking the preamp and power amp section of a, let's say they call it a combo amp, where you buy one amplifier, the cabinet and the preamp and the power amp are all built into, I'll just call it the box. And what it's going to do is it gives you a choice of what amp you want to use and then also what speakers you want to use. So you have access to all kinds of models and sounds from all over the last 70 years. So for my purposes, I really like the sound of a deluxe reverb with a summed, what's it called? It's essentially made to mimic the original Jensen speaker, but I also mixed it with a vintage Marshall speaker. Notice it's not a Marshall amp, it's just the speaker. Okay, so I preferred that from Own Hammer cab IRs. And additionally, from Own Hammer, I bought a cab IR that simulates a 1971 Marshall basket weave 4x12 cabinet. So the setup is the amp is a Marshall Plexi running into the basket weave cabinet. And I just really like that sound. The clean sound has this dreamy tone to it that I really appreciate. And I also like the Fender Deluxe Reverb for the same reasons. It's a little cleaner, a little more, not attack, but you can kind of just hear the notes ring a little more cleanly with a Deluxe Reverb than with many other versions of an amplifier. Okay, and this is all relative to my perception of sound. I'm sure a lot of people have differing opinions on that. That's how it sounds to my ear. I'm only speaking for myself. Okay, but I do like this combination. So when I'm doing my recording, my first amp is going to be the Marshall into the basket weave cabinet. And for my secondary instruments, where I'm doubling a track, I'm going to use the Fender Deluxe Reverb into a that Jensen clone and vintage Marshall summed cabinet. Okay, so right here is pretty much my entire, I don't want to say it's my entire rig, but it's where most of my tone is coming from. Guitars would be better to have on a separate video because there's so much information here already. But you can see that I've got pretty much a studio right here on the on my computer desk. I don't need to run it to an amplifier. I don't need to fix the reflections bouncing, the audio reflections bouncing off a wall in a room. I don't need to hang up styrofoam on my walls to capture the sound. It's all electronic, run through here, and then it all goes into the Scarlett 2i2, the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 third generation interface. This is one of the most popular interfaces on the market. It's not, in terms of interfaces, it's not very expensive. And I think it does a pretty good job. I can listen to myself as I play. I can play over top of things I've already recorded. And I can get a decent studio quality sound running my entire board into this interface. And what I've been pleased to discover after using analog pedals, as I've shown you, into an analog amp and cab modeler into my DAW digital audio workstation, which is the software I use. After applying some harmonic exciters plugins in the software and effects to make it sound a little more analog, it does come pretty close to sounding like it would if it had been recorded organically through a physical amplifier into a physical microphone, into a physical, I don't know if it's called an outboard, but a physical interface where I would edit everything right there in the context of the studio.